Hello, cosmonauts. Today we are going to be exploring what Reddit ask. What's your too coincidental to be believed story that actually happened to you? Answer 1. A not-so-happy story with a good ending. When I was 19, my boyfriend of a year had slapped me across the face, which left me shaken and confused. I called for a taxi to take me back to my mother's house, the home I had left because of her abusive husband, my stepfather. My boyfriend tried to stop me leaving, which caused a scene as I was hopping into the taxi, which led to the driver asking me what it was all about. I proceeded to tell him about how my boyfriend and I were deeply in love, but that he was very jealous and didn't trust me, and ultimately things had led up to him being violent with me for the first time that evening. The taxi driver became very serious and told me that I had to leave the relationship. He was really adamant about it. At that point, we had just arrived at my mother's house, and I will never forget the look he gave me as he turned around and said to me, "I have driven your mother home here before. We live in a big city, so this was a very big coincidence." My mother never catches taxis, and I knew it must have happened one time when she was out with her abusive husband, and he had turned nasty, leaving her with no other way to get home. It made me realize I had fallen into the same pattern of relationship that my mother was in, which woke me up and gave me the courage and strength to end it. Eventually, my mother also left her husband. Many years later, she and I are now both in happy relationships with much kinder men, and the cycle is thankfully broken. Answer 2. My friend once had a co-worker hand her a 25-year-old photo with an inscription on the back stating the names and ages of the children depicted. The co-worker asked her, "Is this you and your sister?" When she stated that yes, it was, the co-worker told her she had found it inside a book she purchased from a second-hand store. Apparently, my friend's mom had been using the photo as a bookmark many years ago. She had lost the book on an interstate bus trip. We have no idea where it was in the intervening 25 years. Answer 3. Back in the summer of 2010, I lived in a tent in the backyard of an amazing lady named Gretchen. Long story. She had a trampoline, an apple tree, ripe tomatoes growing on vines, and fresh blackberries right off the bush, and there was a long line of lavender shrubs lining the long driveway. It was the best summer of my youth. This was in northern Washington state, near the Canadian border. I moved away that winter and we fell out of touch. 4 or 5 years later, I had moved and traveled extensively, and I ended up meeting my SO and was living in Central Florida, over 3,000 miles away. I was working at a coffee shop and a woman came in while I was mopping, and I stopped and did a double take because she looked so similar to Gretchen. I heard her give her name and it wasn't my old friend. After a moment though, I just couldn't get over how uncanny it was, so I blurted out, "I'm sorry, but you look just like an old friend of mine, but..." Her name was Gretchen, and she lived in Washington. The lady blinked at me and said, "Well, I have a sister named Gretchen who lives in Washington." It was bananas. She called her sister, and it was my old buddy. We hadn't spoken in years, but a few months later, Gretchen flew out to visit her sister, who was living not too far away from me, and they both came around for a visit. That was one of 3 greatest coincidences of my life. Answer 4 months before my now wife of 23 years, and I started dating, I bought a concert ticket with a bunch of my friends for a show that was coming to my hometown. About 2 weeks before the show, my wife and I met and started dating. She decided she would go to the show also and bought an extra ticket from one of her friends, someone I didn't know at all. We pre-gamed for a while before the show, and by the time we got into the venue, we were feeling pretty okay. She and I never once looked at our tickets, not even when we showed them to get in. Paper ticks back in those days. Once we got in and wandered around for a bit, we decided we would go to the spot of whoever had the best seat. Pulled out the tickets to see where to head, and we had seats right next to each other. We've never looked back. Answer 5. Back in 2001, our school was on a class trip to Washington, D.C. We were between tour times, and 5-ish of us were just kind of looping around the mall past the Capitol building. This was back when you could just, be there because nothing had happened yet, but I digress. Anyway, saw a guy near the reflecting pool with some folks in suits following him. He was in a wheelchair, looked familiar, but I couldn't place him. Suddenly, the wheelchair unfolded and stood up on 2 wheels. This was Dean Kamen, inventor, founder of the first robotics competition, and a couple of us in our group had founded a robotics team 2 years before to compete in that competition. We wandered over and introduced ourselves, said thank you, that we were big fans, asked for his autograph. Nerd stuff. Cut to years later. I'm long graduated and volunteering for the program. I run into him at one of the regional competition events where he's visiting and kind of offhandedly mention we met him in DC the one time. He looks at me and goes, "That was you." So it turns out we accidentally ruined his day a little, not that he held it against us. The folks in suits were interviewing him for a news spot and we sort of broke the flow. They 100% convinced themselves we were plants that Dean had arranged to show up, and he had a huge ego problem. It apparently changed the timbre of the rest of the day. Worth it though. Answer 6. Really low point. Loneliness was weighing heavy. Was missing my brother who'd passed away sometime prior. I asked the universe if it really was listening to show some kind of kindness in reflection to how I was feeling. Few minutes later, literally, a stranger approached me and inquired about me, my brother. I looked like my brother, so they had asked. Used to telling the story of my brother who had died. I told it once again and received a huge how my brother would hug someone. Hug from this passerby. I knew then, the world is a strange place. Answer 7. I grew up and went to summer camp in northern Minnesota. In my 40s, I moved to Australia. My wife and I were vacationing in New Zealand and decided to rent a car and drive into the middle of nowhere, stopping along the way to take photos of the scenery. We pulled into a lookout in a remote area, just large enough for 4 or 5 cars at most. We hadn't seen a car in the last hour or so, but as we were getting out, another car pulled in. The driver was wearing a shirt with the name of my old summer camp on it. I struck up a conversation and it turns out he attended, but was a few years younger than me, so we didn't really know each other. We started naming people a couple years younger than me, who were a couple years older than him. And one of the people we both remembered was your typical extroverted class clown. As we were laughing at some of that kid's antics, another car pulled up and a third couple joined us at the lookout. The guy overheard us mention the name of the camp clown and said, "That's my name, and I used to go there," pointing at the shirt. It was him. From a tiny summer camp in Minnesota, 3 people on the other side of the planet happened to all stop at the same place at the same time in the middle of absolutely nowhere. If it happened in a movie, I'd never believe it. Answer 8. I'm a bus driver. Part of my route took me through a mall. One day, while on a 2-lane road that was about to merge, a car tried to beat me to it and sideswiped me, blamed me, but he was held at fault. A year later, I was hit again by someone making a right turn from the left lane. Not only did it happen at the same spot as the previous accident, but one of the cops who showed up was the same one who came to the first one. Answer 9. When managing a hotel, a couple from Tennessee came through. As I checked them in, they told me they were driving across Canada. The man looked at my name tag and said, "Menacing Gummy. Is that a popular last name in Canada?" I said that it wasn't at all. Fairly uncommon, in fact. He looked confused and told me that a few days before they went to a tourist information booth 3 provinces over, and the lady that helped them had the same last name as me. Knowing that it would only serve to perpetuate the idea that many Americans have that all Canadians know that guy Steve they met on holidays once, I had to explain that woman was my aunt. Answer 10. I went to see the Rolling Stones at a huge stadium in the 90s. We were in a great state of mind and got there just as they started with "Start Me Up." We went forward, and no one ever checked our tickets. Not once. We went down to the floor level. Still no one looked at our tickets, including us. We had no idea where our seats were. We finally got within about 12 rows of the very front of the stage and saw 2 open seats and took them. No one ever looked at our tickets. About halfway through the concert, we decided to see where our real seats were. We showed an usher, and he took us back the same seats. We found our seats at a 40,000-seat venue by luck. Answer 11. A few years retired as a South Bronx elementary school teacher after 32-year career. In the early 2000s, my girlfriend and I were on a trip to the Galapagos Islands. I heard my name being called out. It was one of my least favorite students about 10 years before. Literally at the far end of nowhere, I ran into a former student 6 years ago. I was called for jury duty, and I had to tell the judge that I could not serve on a particular case because the defendant was the brother of the student I met in the Galapagos. Answer 12. When I was 17, on a whim I went camping about 150 miles from home in the middle of nowhere with a bunch of friends. My parents basically said, "Call us at this time every day you're gone so we hear from you." The only phone was 17 miles from the campsite, and on the second night there, I forgot until about 20 minutes before I was supposed to call. Got into Dad's Blazer and went tearing down the mountain to get to the one payphone within like 50 miles. I pull up, and there's this woman talking on the phone. Yuck, 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 yuck. Talking about fucking nothing while I'm sweating bullets, and I kept getting madder and madder about it. Nearly 45 minutes later, she finally hangs up, and as she was walking away, I made some nasty comment to her. She flipped me off, gave me a hearty fuck you, and I didn't see her again. 2 years later, I'm at university, a good 4-hour drive from both where my parents lived and everywhere else I had been, and one of my best friends that winter had a new girlfriend. She and I hit it off immediately. We were insta-best friends. Met her for coffee one morning, and we were laughing about something, and I finally said, "You know, I have this nagging feeling I know you from somewhere." She said the same thing, and it had been bugging her too. So we started exchanging notes. We realized it at the same time. Me, "You were that bitch on the phone," and her, "You were that little prick in the blue Chevy." Had a good laugh about it. She said, "Man, you ruined my whole fucking night with that." I went back home and had a bunch of beers and complained about you to anybody that would listen. Answer 13. After my mom died, I couldn't bear parting with her sewing machine, even though mine was better. I'd tried to convince her for years to upgrade her machine, but she'd always put it off. Don't put things off. Mom was only 63 when she passed. After about 5 or so years, I thought it was time to let it go, but I wanted to give it to someone who needed it. I posted it, and the first reply I got was from a woman who had the same machine and loved it, but hers had stopped working long before. I was happy to give it to her, but she lived about 3 hours away. Oddly, my dad was going to the area with his newish wife, who is lovely, even if she's not my mom, to visit her mom, and he said he'd take it. He dropped the machine off and all was well. A few months later, he called me and was just beside himself. His wife's mom had entered hospice, and when the nurse caring for her entered the room, they were all stunned to see that it was the sewing machine recipient. They apparently all got a little emotional. My mom was also a nurse, and I like to think she set it up. Answer 15. Oh, I've had a couple of those. Once I was taking a flight back from Madrid to my country. I was sitting close to my gate and some dude sat next to me, waiting for the same flight. Didn't recognize him at first, went into the plane, and he was on the seat next to mine. Noticed him staring at me like, I think I know who you are. Yeah, sure did. It was a childhood friend I hadn't seen in 12 years that moved to another state when we were kids, pre-social media. Didn't even remember he existed. Number 2, I lived in Canada for a year when I was in high school. Met a lot of people, and this girl in particular. Mary became my friend. We hung out and stuff, but that was it. Went back home, she went back to hers, didn't exchange numbers, social media, or anything of that sort. 9 years later, I was living in New York, went with a couple of friends to watch a baseball game. We took the metro. First car was packed, so we let that one go and waited for the other one to arrive. When it did, the doors opened right in front of me, with Mary standing right in front of me. We had zero contact. Turns out she was living there too. That was a weird one. Another example. I usually take several flights a year that I have to take a plane from my city to another hub, then to the final city. I have come across the same friend at least 5 times at the hub airport. Never told him I was going to travel that day. Don't really talk much, but he's always there. It's very weird. We don't even live in the same city and we're never going to the same place. There's more. I think the Matrix is fucking with me sometimes. Hey you, if you enjoying the video, subscribe for more histories. Answer 16. I am adopted and grew up without knowing any of my biological family or anything about them. I loved animals as a child. It grew into a complete fascination with parrots as I became a young adult. Total hyperfixation for a while. Learned everything I possibly could. I had a pair of cockatoos and was the resident crazy bird lady in my friend circle. I always thought it was just a completely random thing I liked parrots so much. I got the opportunity to meet my biological grandfather on my bio mom's side when I was 22. Turns out, he was the town's resident parrot guy the whole time my biological mom was growing up. He had a pair of cockatoos he was absolutely in love with, along with a few other birds. It blew me away. My whole life I knew nothing about these people and grew up nowhere near them with completely unrelated influences. And still I was just like him, with something so totally seemingly random too. Answer 17. I work at a medical examiner and was working with a new employee who was doing part-time work at a local funeral home. She saw my last name for the first time and was like, oh wow, we just got a guy at the funeral home with that last name. It's not a common name, so I was like, what's the first name? And it was my dad's name, even with the same initial for the middle name. It wasn't my dad, but there was like 10 minutes there where I thought my dad died. Answer 18. I dropped out of college halfway through freshman year and ended up in an abusive relationship with an asshole. We rented a shitty little motel room month to month, and I worked at a local place answering phones. When I met my birth mother, years later, she told me about how she dropped out of college before she got pregnant with me. And while she was pregnant, she and my birth dad rented the exact same room at the motel, and she answered phones at the same place as me, like our lives lined up exactly at those ages. It's always blown my mind. Answer 19. My grandparents split up because my grandfather was a raging abusive alcoholic. My grandma took my mom to live in a cult, under the guise of it being a spiritual commune. My grandfather then dated a lady who had 2 young daughters. After they broke up, one of the lady's daughters was SA'd and unalived in her bed. Strangely enough, this is when my grandfather got sober. They never found the killer as a child. I was groomed and SA'd by him. Couple decades later, I was contacted by the police asking if I had any living male relatives who shared his DNA for a cold case. Naturally, this sent me into a spiral. Then the very next week, my daughter started work on the set of a TV show of a cold case. Guess which one? Answer 20. Several times I've had dreams that seem normal. Only thing is that something would happen in that dream that normally wouldn't happen in real life, although these things are not statistically unlikely. It's just that there's no reason for it to actually happen. There was always this feeling that it wasn't just a dream. For example, I had a dream that I was at work and my ex came in. I hadn't thought about her in a long time and hadn't seen her in years. When we were together, she never liked that place. And sure enough, not a week later, she came in. Never seen her there before or after that. Answer 21. Back in 2021, I had been begging my partner to let me get a kitten. For literally months, I had been sending him postings on local shelter and rescue websites of adorable kittens. So, come my birthday, we are enjoying our cheesecake factory we had DoorDashed. Suddenly, I get a flurry of snaps and a phone call from our roommate at the time. She and her mom had found a kitten in her mom's backyard. Roommate's partner, who was also our roommate, said no to them keeping it. Roommate had estimated this kitten was about 4 to 5 weeks old, too young to be away from mama. So I look at my partner and I'm like, well, we can foster him until he's old enough to rehome. Anyways, that kitten is going to be 4 in August and he's my son. We joke I manifested too hard. Oh, also, 2 days later, roommate's mom found another kitten that we assumed to be my kitten's sibling. So my roommate ended up with a kitten after all. LMNOO. Answer 22. I live in the US, but I was in Germany for a music festival. My travel companion, also an American, and I were not enjoying the festival because of a freak heat wave. So we decided to go see a friend in Prague. A series of mishaps, missed trains, slow trains instead of the fast trains, and a broken down train pushed our travel out quite a bit. In Dresden, we had a few hours layover due to the delays. A kind stranger told us how to get to the main square to kill some time. Because of the heat wave, lots of people came to the fountain square to play in the water and cool off. While we walked around, we were approached by a local woman who complimented our clothes. We were wearing brocade corsets. We chatted a bit, and it somehow came out that she and my companion had studied under the same dance teacher. I was like, what are the odds? We were only here because of all the train issues and heat, etc. Answer 23 me, but my relatives. In the 1950s, my great-uncle met a woman and they started dating. She was kind of fiery, and he would hold his own when needed. They had been courting for months when they had a huge fight. Massive blazing row over some small thing. They were so aggravated by each other that his date stormed out of his house, swearing never to speak to that man again. It had been over a month when one day he thought, you know, I really miss her. Maybe this won't work, but I'll try and go over to her house, apologize, and see whether I can win her back. So he set out walking. At about the halfway point between their houses, he bumped into her and confessed how he was feeling, and so did she. She had chosen that exact moment to walk to his house, apologize, and try and restart too. They must have been married 50 plus years when my great auntie and uncle passed away peacefully within a year or so of each other. Answer 24. I grew up with just me, my mom, and my brother in the late 80s. My mom was on top of being a single mother, also an immigrant, and all alone in this country. So needless to say, life was rough. Anyway, after 14 years of raising 2 kids on her own, my mom finally saved up enough to buy a small duplex across town. It was her biggest dream. There was a tall guy who walked his dog past our house every other day. I thought it was the ugliest dog I'd ever seen. My mom's best friends had just begun a job at a new factory 2 towns over. Their new manager looked just like my little brother. Turns out their new manager lived 2 blocks behind my mom and had an ugly dog and was my father. So TLDR, we unknowingly moved 2 blocks away from my dad and watched him walk his dog for a year before meeting him. Answer 25. My grandma had cancer when I was in my final exam year of high school. Her prognosis was bad, and they expected her to die within a year. My high school was close to her house, and during breaks, I would walk over to check on her. We were quite close. My life was otherwise quite shit, and I was bordering on suicidal, and in my desperation, I begged the universe not to take my grandma away. I promised to work hard at my exams and do my best to stay alive if my grandma would also survive. A few days later, we got news from the hospital. The scans showed her cancer was gone. Probably the chemo radiation worked, or the severity was initially an overestimation by the doctors or whatever. But everyone was flabbergasted by this result. It felt like a miracle. It felt impossible. She lived for another couple of years and then her cancer came back. But by then, I also felt strong enough to let her go. That was my small miracle, and selfish though it was, I didn't think I could live without her. I asked this all for myself. I will be forever grateful. Answer 26. I was backpacking through China and picked up 3 travel companions. We crisscrossed the country together for a month before 2 of them had to go home to Europe. The other person and I traveled together for another month before he returned home. I took a photo of the 4 of us on a boat. I got all of their addresses and sent them some postcards from various places, but never heard from them again. More than 10 years later, I was in a restaurant with a friend when he got a FaceTime call from his sister who lived in Europe in the same country as one of my China travel companions. He went outside and talked to her for 10 minutes or so. When he came back, he told me his sister just got engaged. He talked about his sister's fiance and mentioned his name. I jokingly said, "Is his last name fairly common name?" My friend said yes and asked how I knew. I told him about my travel China companion from there and showed him the picture I took on the boat. It was indeed one of my travel companions. My friend sent it to his sister and freaked her out. Answer 27. I was in the military stationed at Fort Sam Houston, which is a training post. The coincidence happened 3 different ways. I'm showing a pal photos from home. One was of a man named Tom Gagnon, a co-worker who I had later learned lived in my apartment complex. That had already been crazy for me. since our workplace was in Phoenix, about 10 miles away from where we lived in Mesa, Arizona. But that coincidence was then, and this was now. While I'm flipping through the photos I brought from home, when I passed the one of him in the apartment swimming pool, I mentioned his name. She said, "Oh wow, I dated a guy named Gagnon for a couple years back in Rhode Island. We were in Phoenix, but I knew he was from Rhode Island. So of course I had to ask her old boyfriend's name and call my friend to see if they were related. Indeed they were. He was the father of her former beau. The final stage of the coincidence, though, came a few years ago when I got my DNA testing done and discovered that his surname is featured very prominently in my DNA matches. I haven't located a direct link to someone with his first name, but I won't be surprised if it happens." Answer 28. When I was younger, I got up late for work and quickly got dressed. As I stepped outside, one of yesterday's socks fell out of my trouser leg. I picked it up and put it in my inside pocket and headed to work. I worked in a garage, fixing cars at the time, and in the afternoon I had washed some cars that we were finished with. My coworkers saw the puddles on the floor and started trying to push each other into them. In the scuffle, one of my shoes came off, and I saw this evil grin come over my friend who pushed me hard, and I had to put my shoeless foot down in the puddle. He thought this was hilarious until he saw me take off my wet sock and calmly take a dry one out of my pocket to replace it. Answer 29. I was flying across the Atlantic solo, for the first time, to visit my grandma after graduating high school. I had chosen some tiny no-name college and was suddenly doubting not going to a more famous school that had accepted me. Planes can make me melancholy, so I really started wallowing in my poor life choice. The old lady next to me struck up a conversation, and I gave her my life story. She was hard of hearing, so I had to repeat myself and speak up. No sooner did I finish than a passenger a row up on the aisle turned around and said, "I'm sorry, I couldn't help overhearing you. I just graduated from no-name college. You're going to love it there. Actually, my best friend's brother is starting there this fall too. Cool guy, you should connect with him." My whole outlook changed. The friend's brother and I became good friends. I stayed all 4 years instead of transferring as I had been planning. As if that's not enough, fast forward 6 years and I was at a kindergarten and met a woman my wife, her colleague, was always telling stories about. As soon as I heard her voice, I knew she was the one who gave me the college pep talk on the plane. It was really cool to be able to tell her my side of the story and thank her for changing my whole perspective in that random encounter halfway across the Atlantic Ocean. Answer 30. There are lots, but two that stick out are, I was at a dollar store and literally ran shoulder to shoulder into a man. I apologized, and we both ended up cashing out at the same time as there were two workers, and I happened to walk up behind as he was finishing his purchase. We enter the parking lot and he is 2 cars down from mine. He pulls out and I'm just gathering everything as I'm about to drive. And he jumps out of his car, as says, "Holy shit, we have the same license plate number." I wish I could remember where he was from. We were both super flabbergasted. I met a nice girl at the club in time. We were both having a ciggy and her friends ditched her. I said she could join along, and by the end of the night we decided we would like to keep in touch as we had a lot in common. When we exchanged numbers, I said my digits first. She had already had my number in her phone. I don't know how it happened. Answer 31. Without knowing or planning it, a friend of mine and I ended up being neighbors 3 separate times across multiple state lines. After college, my wife and I moved to a state neither of us was from. I play games online with my friends a lot. After a few months, I asked a friend where he was living now, that he also has moved 500 miles from home. We were living on the same street, a few houses apart. Years later, he ends up getting a really good job, but in another state, so he moves. I know which state, but don't remember his city or address. We still play online. Couple years later, I also moved states after finding better work. Same state as friend. After getting settled and getting online to play, the friend asks what city I ended up choosing. I give him my new address. "Bro, I can see your house from my window." This exact exchange happens a 3rd time about a year later. We both moved cities again, separately, without mentioning it. Street apart in the same neighborhood. We have since moved apart, but I'm just waiting for it to coincidence us again. Answer 32. Went to a work function with my husband in another state. We had lived in Virginia at the time, and the whole Virginia team was doing a trip to NYC. He introduced me to his colleague who worked out of Richmond, VA, and was wearing a sweater with the college in my hometown. I told him that's where I was from, and he's like, "Me too, whereabouts?" I told him the suburb, and he goes, "Oh, my aunt lives there, a road called John Huss," and I go, "That's the road I lived on." "Who's your aunt?" Turns out I lived across the street from his aunt, and his cousin used to babysit me. He called her up right there at like 10 at night and asked her about me, and she goes, "Oh, yay, that's my mom's name's daughter, Alosos." Answer 33. This girl and I were part of the same youth ministry and had become friendly towards each other. She left unexpectedly, and I didn't really get to see her after that. except in passing when I would go to her mom's house for Bible study, who was still active in the church. That church was really toxic, Cheon culty, so I ended up leaving when I became an adult and cutting off anyone who went there. I had just started going to a new church, and one day someone a few chairs in front was hardcore staring at me. I was like, "What up?" until she screamed and ran over to hug me. It turns out we had both just started going to the same church. We don't go to church anymore, but she's been my best friend for 10 years now. Answer 34. I posted one response already, but just remembered this one. It involves my daughter Ember too. In 1992, we had taken our dog into the vet to get a growth removed from his tail. The surgery would take a few hours. The doer was to call our home phone and leave a message on our answering machine. Our outgoing message was, "Hi, this is Bob and Ember. We can't come to the phone right now. Neither can Suzanne. Wife, leave a message and we'll get back to you as soon as possible. Bye." And then Ember says, "Bye, too." When I got home, the vet had left a message to say our dog had done well and we could pick him up. I called to say thanks, and she, the vet, asked me my name. When I said Bob, she replied, "That's so strange. My husband's name is Bob, and my daughter's name is Ember." Turns out her husband was a firefighter who came up with the name. I had chosen Ember's name years before I even dated my wife. I just thought it had a softer sound than the ever-popular Amber. I kept it to myself for years because I was afraid someone would steal it before I had a daughter of my own. Cool, right? Answer 35. I was young and dumb. I was dating two guys at once. Neither knew about the other and were in such vastly different circles that the chances of them ever running into each other were impossible. 10+ year age difference, different towns, different hobbies, etc. Well, one night they somehow ended up at a random bar sitting next to each other and struck up a conversation. They both talked about who they were dating, curious at how their girlfriends both were named Little Oldman Boy from Town X. So they both shared pics of the girl they were seeing. And obviously it was me in all those pics. I got a very interesting call that night around 1 a.m. with both of them on the phone. I was single very quickly after that call. Hey you! Subscribe for more histories. Answer 36. I went to a private high school in Tokyo, briefly, in the 1990s. As an out queer kid from the coastal US, suddenly surrounded by Mormon expats, it was a very, very miserable experience. Out of desperation, a few other misfits and I formed a school gay-straight alliance. Yeah, that's what we called them back then. Got in lots of trouble with the homophobes, which led to me fleeing Japan before the school year ended. 15 years later, I was working at a US West Coast university with a well-intentioned but difficult boss. One day, she excitedly told me that she just met someone who used to know me. This person taught at the aforementioned school in Japan, and, supposedly, unprompted, mentioned me by name as they told some story about teaching there and me and my friend's queer organizing effort. WTF? Shortly thereafter, my former boss retired and developed dementia, which last I heard is pretty advanced. That fact seems unlikely to have any bearing on the story, but who TF knows? Answer 37. Was on a Mexican Riviera cruise back in like 2004. You sit at the same table in the formal dining room for dinner, but if you go there for lunch, you just get randomly seated with other guests. Wife and I got seated with another couple and we get to talking. Turns out we're from the same area of Northern California, but other husband and I both had the same spinal surgery by the same neurosurgeon in the same hospital. And there we are eating lunch in a big boat somewhere around Mazatlan. Answer 38. I was witness to an incident at a bar where a girl was the victim of a freak accident. Being me, I completely took control over the situation, recognizing both the girl, her boyfriend, were not aware of the severity, nor was the bar, plus alcohol. After getting her in an ambulance, I went to the hospital with the boyfriend and spent hours there just shooting the shit with him. Found out they had been hooking up for a week, and he was moving to Texas the next week, but was seriously regretting not getting to know her sooner. They had been co-workers for a long time, and I guess the move finally gave him the courage to make a move. I left the hospital without exchanging contact information, which now seems so silly to me, but both of us were still very traumatized and had no idea what this would turn into. A couple of weeks later, a new girl starts at my job. Somehow I ended up telling her this story. She then proceeds to go home and tell one of her best friends, not realizing her friend's father was in the other room eavesdropping. He walks into the room and goes, "I'm the PI on that case. Any chance your coworker would meet with me?" She asks. I of course say yes. Next thing I know, I'm at a Starbucks giving statements to the PI who kept saying it's crazy how much of a coincidence this all is because in their statements they kept talking about the blonde girl who helped them, but had no idea what her name was or how to reach her, and the PI was stumped on what to do. Multiple statements sauced court dates. Later they finally settled after years. The poor girl had to have multiple surgeries, miss a ton of work, and has lasting nerve damage. The good news, we all did get into contact because they wanted to thank me for their help. They ended up getting a $2 million settlement plus hospital bills, and now they're married.
That was enough for today, Cosmonaut. I'll wait for you in the next travel.